And finally, Hitler confesses, he says, only one thing could have broken our movement: if the adversary had understood its principle and from the first day had smashed with the most extreme brutality the nucleus of our new movement. Who could know better than he?
There's a good old-fashioned word for people like us. We call them suckers. And there are other people who stay up nights figuring out how to take away what they've got. Yeah, Mike's got something, all right. He's got America. But there are guys who stay up nights figuring out how to take that away from him.
I happen to know the facts. Now, friends, I'm just an average American. But I'm an American. And some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil. I see people with foreign money. I see Negroes holding jobs that belong to me and you. Now I ask you, if we allow this thing to go on, what's going to become of us real Americans?
I've heard this kind of talk before, but I never expected to hear it in America.
This fellow seems to know what he's talking about.
What are we real Americans going to do about it? You'll find it right here in this little pamphlet. The truth about Negroes and foreigners. The truth about the Catholic Church.
Do you believe in that kind of talk?
I don't know, makes pretty good sense to me.
And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes. Without alien foreigners. Without Catholics. Without Freemasons. You know these people.
What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies. These are the people who are trying to take over our country. Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them. Fight them and destroy them before they destroy us. Thank you.
Before he said Masons, you were ready to agree with him.
Well, yes, but he was talking about... What about those other people?
But in this country, we have no other people. We are American people.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so. You see, they knew that they were not strong enough to conquer a unified country. So they split Germany into small groups. They used prejudice as a practical weapon to cripple the nation. Of course, that was not easy to do. They had to work hard to do it. You see, we human beings are not born with prejudices. Always they are made for us. Made by someone who wants something. Remember that when you hear this kind of talk. Somebody is going to get something out of it. And it isn't going to be you.
Hey fam, welcome to Punks for Progress. I'm Reverend Air. In this video, I have the truly unique and rare pleasure to bring you a conversation that I was fortunate enough to have with Michael Brooks. It's about 2 years ago. And it was on the topic of free speech absolutism versus deplatforming. At the time that we had the conversation, like Sargon had just been deplatformed and all kinds of leftists were talking about, we can't celebrate deplatforming fascists because it's a slippery slope to us and having our free speech taken away. Anyway, I put together this two-part series video, which is ultimately about 3 hours, covering what I thought were all the very different issues relevant to that discussion at that time. And in it, I featured the 30-minute talk I had with Michael Brooks. I had called in Majority Report, and they indulged the topic with me, and we talked, like I said, for about 30 minutes. And so today I'm on Twitter, and I see everybody barfing up just garbage bullshit takes all over it about how we shouldn't celebrate Trump being kicked out of our spaces, and how we shouldn't celebrate Nazis making shit tons of money off of social media, spreading the most toxic, weaponizing, stochastic terror as fucking garbage onto everybody, onto all of our communities. And we're not supposed to celebrate that because free speechisms and whatever. I still don't buy it. But, I saw someone mention the word deplatform, and that instantly reminded me this morning, oh yeah, I did a 2-part video on deplatforming. So I went to grab the link and share it around some social media spots, and it's fucking blocked. It's blocked for a couple copyright violations. Sony dinged me for using Adamant's Stand and Deliver, and The Cure dinged me, and I just didn't catch it when it happened, and so I'm disputing it on fair use claims, and eventually you'll be able to see it. But I went in, I downloaded the first episode. The part 2 is still up. You should be able to watch that on the channel. But I took the first episode, downloaded it, and I clipped out basically just the conversation between myself and the MR crew, and when Brooks was hosting. And but I've left in a little bit of the opening montage because it was something that Kyle Kalinske had said at the time that I thought was absolute garbage, and I wanted to explain why in relation to what free speech absolutism is. And I just thought it was kind of a good setup for the broader conversation between myself, Brooks, and the crew. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it and let you watch it. I'd appreciate if you stuck around afterwards, because there's just some thoughts I have, and they're not my own. Something that a number of people have talked about, and that's kind of being floated around and fleshed out a little bit about how to sort of properly, how do we go about differentiating between real nefarious characters pushing hidden hate speech and speech that just makes people uncomfortable, right? And I have some thoughts on that I think are helpful to the conversation and can help push the conversation forward a little bit. And so I'll leave that for the end of the video. So with no further whatever, this is my conversation with, rest in power, Michael Brooks, on the very currently hot topic conversation of free speech absolutism versus deplatforming. So here it is, fam.
So what exactly are the rules? Because if the ultimate point is, all right, listen, we just don't like them because they're insane, because of their insane politics, is that really a standard that we want to set? Like, oh, we don't like you because of your politics and we're going to pull you down? Because I got news for you. That's going to backfire on every single one of us. So, again, let me walk you through it. In the case of the Proud Boys, listen, it is true. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys that have concerned the fuck out of me. Now, they swear up and down, Gavin McInnes swears it, and fucking Anthony Cumia was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he swears up and down like, no, it started as a joke, and it's not serious, and blah, 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 blah. I've seen the videos of the Proud Boys, and I do think it's an inescapable conclusion that Gavin McInnes has literally advocated for direct violence. Now, I'm a free speech absolutist, but direct threats of violence are one thing that doesn't even pass the free speech absolutist test. In other words, nobody of sane mind is going to say, yeah, you're allowed to directly advocate for specific violence and get away with it.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to address Kyle's use of ableist language. He uses it incessantly throughout all his content. Most progressive media uses it incessantly throughout their content, and it's a problem. Kyle in particular, though, is one of these people who is under the impression that calling men bitches is acceptable. Of course, he would never, ever call a woman that. He understands the importance of not doing that. But and I've actually argued this with a number of progressives, and the response I usually get is that it means something different now. So apparently in their progressive white male privilege, they've made that decision. I don't agree with it. I think it's troublesome, and I think that there's a lot of women out there who probably wouldn't appreciate that and weren't in on the meeting when the definition of that word was changed. So anyway, Kyle's troublesome use of language aside, the reason I wanted to play that clip is because it proves that Kyle is, in no uncertain terms, not a free speech absolutist. For starters, I would argue that free speech absolutism is a farce. It doesn't exist. And it's most assuredly not backed by the Constitution, whether you care about that kind of shit or not. But he says in the video that promoting violence doesn't meet the free speech absolutist criteria. And I'm sorry, Kyle, I got news for you. You're wrong. It absolutely does meet the criteria, because the concept is absolutism. That means, getting on any format you want and saying go out and fuck people up and kill them and choke a tranny and shit like Gavin McInnes has said is acceptable, because that's free speech absolutism. Unless you're calling it free speech absolutism with various caveats, which you're not a free speech absolutist. And if you can see a glimpse into at least some instances where free speech absolutism is unacceptable, then maybe you can start to glimpse to see other places where free speech absolutism is not acceptable. So, okay, having covered that and given Kyle more shit than I actually would like to, because I frankly do have a lot of respect for Kyle. I think he's incredibly intelligent, and in terms of understanding Washington politics and the day-to-day manifestations of Washington, he usually has really, really great insight, and he's one of the reasons, which is one of the reasons why I watch people like him and Cenk Uygur. But I tend to have issues with some of their narratives, like what I just described. It sucks to have to sit through that shit when you just want to hear him talk about Washington, but he's got to call men bitches and talk about how people are crazy and insane. Who aren't, which is totally throwing people who have mental health issues under the bus. And it's just like, can you just talk about why Trump's or whatever it is, or what Chuck Schumer said today instead?
You're calling from a 775 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Reverend Aaron from Punks for Progress.
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. I wanted to talk to you. I'm so glad that you're actually hosting, Michael.
Oh.
Because I want to talk about deplatforming a little bit.
Okay.
Because I got to hang up with this issue.
Okay.
So I should say I don't have a real, strong stance on it either way, although I am leaning more towards deplatforming of fascism being a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to kind of, before we get into it, point out that there's a difference between what me and my comrades and others did over the last year or two in Berkeley in organizing counter demonstrations against like Ben Shapiro and Milo's so-called Free Speech Week. I don't see those as the same thing, and they get lumped into the deplatforming argument a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you can elaborate, but I think protest is part of the same process of free speech, which I actually believe in pretty strongly. So I agree with you.
Excellent. So I'm glad we sort of established that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side of it, so Kyle Klinsky just recently put up a video where he's really adamant about the sort of slippery slope argument of deplatforming fascism, ultimately hurting us, right?
Yep.
And I'm open to this argument. Now, I have a small platform. We don't ask for money. My income is not reliant on it, so I don't have as much, flesh in the game as people like you or Kyle do. Okay.
Right.
But I haven't seen the evidence yet. So Kyle cites It's Going Down, which is a fantastic media outlet if people want to check out true anarchist, critique and perspective. They're amazing. It's just Going Down.
I listen to them all the time.
Pulled down. Yeah, they're incredible. And they've even done stuff for our platform, and they're just amazing for the community. And they were piled on, I don't know, year and a half or so ago by alt-righters because they were doing such a great job of supporting Antifa, and they got pulled down off Patreon. Now, I don't know if they've been reestablished or not, but this is the example that Kyle uses as the slippery slope if we're going to be bringing down, Sargon and, InfoWars and all these other people. And I don't see that connection. And I know that you are definitely very hesitant and skeptical of any type of deplatforming. And so I really, and most of the time that you've brought it up on the show, Michael, you're kind of like, look, this is kind of how I see it. I don't want to get into it, bit bam, and then you're kind of out. And I'm interested in.
I don't really want to get into it. Bit bam, I'm out. Let me. Okay. All right. Well, I do have two points I'll make on this, but first, I genuinely want to ask you. I mean, because I feel like it's. How do you not see the connection there? Right. Like to me, the connection is really linear. I can answer that pretty easily because it's linear. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, the premise for why in this situation It's Going Down would have had their issue is a dishonest premise. It wasn't based on their actual activity and things that they were espousing. It was that so many right-wingers had piled on and lied about their messaging.
I'm not making.
So on the converse,
I'm not making a moral.
I know.
But let me just take it here for a second, right? So.
Sure.
I am not ever going to trust Patreon or Twitter or any of these platforms. And some of them might have better organizational cultures than others. So whatever, we can make some distinctions potentially. But I am not for a second going to trust the nuance and disaggregating abilities of any of these companies to make the distinction you're talking about. So stipulate that I agree with you as a moral claim, though, Sargon and It's Going Down are totally different moral propositions. But the process by which a skittish company that wants to avoid controversy and will make a business decision to avoid it, and its broader implications on these crowd-funded platforms, it's a very direct link there. So turnabout is going to be fair play. So that's what I mean. I'm not making any type of actual.
Right. No, I completely
There's no
understand.
actual equivalency. I'm talking about these companies and how they operate.
So if I understand you correctly, it's you're saying, okay, people like Sargon and Lauren Southern and these other people who've been deplatformed for really gross behavior.
Particularly
is bad for their business model.
Right.
I mean, we want them brought down because we see that they have a real-time influence on a lot of ignorant minds that end up electing, a big giant orange Cheeto, right? And so it has real-time effects in the world. So that's why I'm into deplatforming, because it terrifies me that their message gets out to people.
Yeah,
so here are my other. Let me just and then I'll just throw it out because I'll answer what you're saying, and then everybody will jump in on this because I know there's a lot of thoughts on this.
Sure.
So, and part of it, I just want to hear what everybody has to say one at a time because it's important, and I don't know all the answers, obviously. and I want to learn. But okay, so but
Me
there's
too.
my broader. Okay, so the broader thing, and this is let's like kind of put it into three buckets. So my first one is just the business of these platforms and what your the tendencies you're creating. So as an example, one conversation I had many years ago, but it was a really smart sort of distinction, and this is much less serious, but it was like the whole college, like, and this was actually a left-wing critique of comedians complaining about colleges. And the point was, though, is like, it isn't that there's like leftist or subversive comedy getting sponsored by college campuses. It's that all of these campus activity committees, as one might expect from the type of student that would want to be in a campus activity community, no offense, but you know what I'm saying, is to book performers that aren't going to offend anybody and aren't going to do anything that might disrupt anybody's sensibility. And I think that potentially could be the trend line on some of these platforms. And I do think that if, controversy is your concern, and again, I'm thinking about profit-making companies that are not making obvious moral and political distinctions, that is going to have implications for not only fascists, but also socialists and anarchists. Okay, so that's like the business concern. The other concerns I have are, I think that there is sometimes a culture on the left that has gone so quickly to that position versus actually like winning fights, whether they're, figurative, maybe even literal, but I'm focusing on figurative. So as an example, a couple years ago, Doug Lane tells this story. His son at University of Oregon, they did a really important demonstration at a meeting of administrators to protest tuition hikes. It's like one of the most important things students could protest about. And the administration cracked down hard. Like, we're going to kick you out of school type of hard, right? Now, Their response was, to a lot of the organizers, their response was not to, call the press, dig in their heels, not only are we right about this issue, now we're literally getting threatened to have our lives seriously materially harmed for exercising our rights. Some not insignificant number of people pivoted to, well, there are these like anti-abortion protesters who don't get in trouble for their protests on campus, and if we're going to get in trouble, they should get in trouble. Like, disaster, right? Like, the administration's going, sure, we would be happy to police and monitor and control as many students as possible, right? And again, obviously, I'm trusting people in the audience to understand, and it's annoying that I even have to say this, but I know that there's always like the, people who are like intentionally not going to understand things or are literalists. This obviously is not an embrace of anti-choice politics in any way, shape, or form. It was to say that pivot is a big problem, to not go on like, wait a second, we're staying exactly on this issue and you're not going to suppress us, to, well, why aren't these other students getting into trouble? Like this kind of like tattletale self-policing thing. And I think that is a big,
it's like, why didn't the police shoot the white woman with the rock?
We don't want the police to shoot
anybody.
Precisely. That's the liberatory argument.
And it was wrong that they shot the black person in the first place. So don't distract us with this argument of the white women with the rock, right?
And there is totally, by the way, there's absolutely a tendency I could see in certain sectors of criminal justice reform where they'll say like, you know what, you're totally right about this. There are these really unfair racial and structural disparities, and our answer is going to be, we're going to incarcerate even more people to even out the stats. Not, we're going to get rid of this system that is horrible, full stop, and obviously disproportionately affects people of color. Exactly. So I think that's a really big problem. I had one other point, but I guess I'll just sort of leave it there. I think, I guess it's sort of attached to the third point, is I do think at times, I definitely think that there are some people. Okay, I think let me make a distinction. I think Milo, because Milo is, as far as I understand it, was specifically promising to dox and expose people who were transgender on his tour in a way that could jeopardize their well-being. okay, Milo is threatening to expose undocumented students. I didn't remember what it was. I just knew that with Milo, is a totally different dynamic than just speech. So stopping that is a fundamentally different thing because you're protecting somebody's well-being, right? So that takes on a completely different equation. Ben Shapiro being a little smug asshole at your campus, I would say if Ben Shapiro had been primarily ignored or people had gone to his appearances and just been cool, calm, and collected and mocked him, I don't think he would have half the career he has.
I mean, that's what happens in most of the times that he appears in places, though. Like, there's all these stories of they were expecting trouble at this speech. Somebody made a huge thread about this, and it turned out like no, nothing happened.
Well, not actual trouble, but look, there's enough material he's been given for 1 million montages to feed his brand. So on just
and
a
I
very
question
practical,
where a lot of that comes from, because I'll tell you,
right.
Michael, I helped organize one of the main demonstrations against him at Berkeley.
Right.
And what went down there was the positive you were just describing.
Okay.
And anyone that got there and was complete, would do the things that we would be embarrassed or shudder from or understand could be used against us would have been squashed instantly. And
so then that's just his team.
It really was
creating
great
propaganda
and speeches and people from the old civil rights movement that were talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's his team creating propaganda. Then I do think honestly in some of these.
So I guess in the end, man,
yeah.
I'm open to see the reality and the possibility that there could be the slippery slope with deplatform. I think what I'm asserting at this point is I just haven't seen it yet. And again, so with the It's Going Down versus alt-right model, It's Going Down didn't do things that then got the attention of Patreon.
Haven't Antifada accounts been removed from Patreon? I mean, I think isn't that excuse me.
Yeah, and listen,
I hope
that's
the
the problem.
No, I hope not too. I don't want to put that out to the universe.
Yeah. This gets to your argument about not trusting the business that's running this stuff. Because the distinction being, I'm hoping, I guess, which is maybe, kind of misguided, that they would understand, okay, look, you brought down It's Going Down because of lies. You brought down Sargon because of things he actually did.
I think that
there's something in that argument.
I don't think so. I think you're not going to. I would never depend on a Silicon Valley company making adjudications like that, and I think ever.
Well, no, I think what I'm depending on is I'm not seeing any reason I should stop supporting the deplatforming of fascism. I'm not seeing that.
I mean, look, all I'm saying is that
if I see that
that's the new game
to a leftist side, it would be different.
You know what the real play might end up being is that we are going to, on some of these platforms that aren't totally monopolized, there might end up being a left-wing Patreon and a fascist Patreon, and we're going to have to migrate into these different business models.
They already have Hatreon, don't they?
I think so.
Yeah, but those things are always going to run into trouble with payment providers and stuff.
Well,
you fundamentally need to run on some sort of infrastructure.
Well, that's actually right, and I think that's maybe right. That's a more... What I'm saying, though, is if you have two different platforms that say, like, okay, we are providing for different types of politics, then and that's also scary too, frankly. But I think like a payment platform, because of the way their business is run, is going to be more likely to basically be saying like they stopped processing Gavin McInnes stuff because they're scared that there's even a 1% chance that there's organized criminal activity going on. That's not because of somebody giving an interview. So that already becomes a completely different metric that you're measuring by. So, but as long as these things are in the hands of like a Patreon, no, I don't think it's a smart strategy.
This is the problem. This is why I always try to move this conversation onto monopoly, because I don't think you can win on actually having this conversation outside of it. Because if there was no monopoly, I would take my business to a left-wing platform that balances this correctly, right? Like it ices out the fascists and is favorable to left-wingers. I think I could run a Patreon like that fairly well now if you wanted to, but I'm not in charge of Patreon. And the other thing people need to realize with Patreon and the Sargon stuff is they realize, and they're conscious about the fact that they're not just monetizing the content that gets put on Patreon, right? Somebody could subscribe to Literary Hangover if they just liked what I do on this show, and they would never even have to listen to the.
Well, they said that in their statement,
right? And that's
they basically said, like, look, we check out, especially what our top performers do on different platforms.
And that was always going to happen, and that's going to be an increasing site of risk. And I mean, the problem is, I think that continuing to encouraging these things will lead like left wing things get cut too.
100%.
I think that's why the right wing likes to play well, if you're going to let us in, then or if you're going to let them in, then you have to let us in, and if you're going to let us out, we're going to make a hassle out of this XXX
and
example.
There's always going to be, for the foreseeable future, as we work to change it, there's going to be a structural advantage on the right in those dynamics.
Yeah, and I think, I think I understand what he's saying about now. Like, I think Sargon and Milo, like, yeah, fuck them. But I am genuinely, like, I don't want to pour any more gas on the fire as far as that goes.
I don't think it's a wise strategy. And I even think, whatever. I think we can also, frankly, if you want to, you can also parse. Like, I think Milo is in some ways a very easy one to parse, even in his tours, because he was specifically talking about doing an actionable thing to students, as far as I understand. And it already becomes a totally different thing than, frankly, even somebody like Sargon. The guy's a fucking jackass. Like, take him on. Use them as an example to undermine the brand. It's so easy.
Yeah, but if I ran a company like Patreon,
look, that's the marketplace of ideas thing. And here's my issue
of course
with the
you would,
because it's
a business,
right.
and I agree with you, but that's not a durable strategy. But as soon as they've dumped enough money to make it so that, like, enough PragerU videos have been taken literally by enough people that even saying the word socialism is going to lead to, China, a cultural revolution that's going to kill people. Like, you as a business will go away from any controversy. You as a business, until the backlash to what happened to Sam became so unbelievably overwhelming, your first instinct would be, you know what? I don't understand all of this. It's too complicated. I get that, this guy is of uncredible source, but the tweet's controversial. You know what? I don't want to deal with it. That's what businesses do.
But
someone with a smaller platform could have been destroyed by that.
Dude, there is no doubt that somebody with a smaller platform would have been destroyed by that. Most people, if that happened to somebody with a smaller platform, they would not have every single entertainment figure and pundit.
If it happened to somebody who hadn't been platforming a lot of different journalists at a lot of different major publications,
100%, 100%. So as long as we're in the market game, it's not a smart play.
I guess
that's my view.
The point. Can I say what I think about this too? Sure.
With the monopolization thing, I'm saying, like, if we weren't in this context of monopolization and I was just running a Patreon, I would still kick off Sargon for explicitly his political beliefs, and I wouldn't run somebody who speaks like that.
But you would be setting a different company up, which is what we're talking about, which is like, I want my Patreon is committed to socialist, anarchist, cool content.
Exactly.
You're some weird, fucking bigoted idiot from Britain. No, thank you.
So you talk about monopolization.
Yeah,
instead, right?
Sure. And that's the monopolization and innovation. Right. There you go.
Yeah. I agree with some of what you guys have said and disagree with other parts of it. I do think it speaks to the need for real left-wing platforms, because I also do not trust Patreon or any evil tech company, really, to adjudicate these things. I also agree that we need to pick our battles and be smart about it and know where to draw the line between a real fascist who poses either clear and present danger to people or, like, just spreading a violent ideology that leads very directly to violence, like we've seen with the Proud Boys, who have actually put people in the hospital fairly recently, and know when you're just playing into people's hands and when you're not. But, like, okay, I used to be much more of a free speech absolutist than I am right now. But over time, like, as I've gotten more and more information about this stuff, I've kind of changed my mind, because first of all, like if you provide a neutral platform, we're not on equal footing in the marketplace of ideas, right? Some ideas have a lot more money and power behind them than others. So if I don't think any platform is truly going to be neutral, and I do think they have the responsibility to at least try to be smart about who they're featuring and who they're not. And like, we got to use all the tools in our toolbox, you know? And I used to think that deplatforming and protesting people was pointless because it didn't work. But I've seen it work a bunch of times. Like, it really hurt Alex Jones. It really hurt Mike Cernovich, Gavin McInnes. Like, they're pissed off about it. And fewer people are being polluted with their white nationalist garbage as a result. Also, there's no rule, there's no law that says the right and the left have to be treated equally, right? So like the slippery slope argument where, oh, it would be so easy once you set this precedent to use it against the left, that there's no equivalence there.
But which side's capital?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about more. I'm talking in terms of power. Obviously, it's going to be used against the left. I mean, it already is.
And
in fact, a more practical. Just to add to this, because we always talk about like the easy ones, okay? But on Facebook, in response to a lot of pushes on these issues, okay, Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, massive impacts on websites like Brazil Wire. The Atlantic Council, which is a center-right to neocon think tank, is advising Facebook on Latin America content and on foreign policy. And it's already had a massive impact on independent adversarial journalism on U.S. foreign policy. And there is absolutely, not only is it going to favor the right in terms of where capitals will go, it is, I mean, that's not even slippery slope. It already is, barring a couple of top line personalities that we all focus on. The structural creep of what already is getting flattened and moved out of the discourse is on the left. And that's for obvious reasons that, of course, capital will favor the right. So I just think, like, look, it's both a bad play because of the context we're in. And I also think we shouldn't lose sight too of, you know, the other facets of this as well, which is that like these people can be out and we can defeat them and beat them, and we don't have to kind of play that cop hall monitor role.
Here's the thing though. They're going to do that to the left no matter what the left does
I
to
don't
the
know.
right.
I don't know about that.
They are.
Well,
they do and they will.
But what's
and
the
they
evidence for that? Like, we have actual evidence of how these things are working. We need to respond to like what the actual evidence is versus like you could be right, but that's not what the reality is now. So the reality, I feel like
you don't think that they would keep trying to deplatform It's Going Down if the left stopped trying to deplatform Gavin McInnes. I think they absolutely would.
It's possible.
And one thing
but I know
about the right
what is
that
happening
is smart is they use absolutely every tool in their toolbox, and they don't have conversations like this unless it's in a totally disingenuous way that only benefits themselves.
I guess the problem is you're sharpening the tools for them.
Right. You're giving them a
don't
tool.
agree.
They have more tools. They have more advantages. And your hand, like, again, we don't operate in an idealized world. I'm having the conversation as if it's already baked in that they have structural advantages.
I think
that's a given.
I think they invented this and the left has picked it up, because the vast majority of instances where people have been harassed, deplatformed, forced to leave their jobs, it's been for expressing left-wing views.
I mean, my worry and I think the examples of Sargon and Gavin and Milo being deplatformed, like, I think it has damaged their careers and probably
definitely
minimized their ability to damage society. But I worry that the availability of those case studies is overshadowing things like the Crimes of Britain accounts that get shut down, or the Telesur getting
the Telesur. I mean, it's the classic, like, the headlines tell, like, look at these companies, they're cracking down on the alt-right, but the structural instruments that are being put into place, from the Google algorithm searches to Facebook, certainly Twitter accounts. In fact, Twitter accounts still are, there's satiric left-wing personalities that have been banned, and Richard Spencer is still on. So the top line is that even in this, like, it's already being lost on the left. So maybe the most practical answer is, and like, there's conversations that people are having about this that maybe will come out down the road, is really just being like, there needs to be, at least on like the Patreon level, some type of explicitly left platform.
Absolutely.
I agree
with that too. And here's
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
And if you have these sort of different, Patreon sort of services or personal services, they're not normalized by being on the same platform as everybody else. So it's like, oh, come on. This was how Milo got as far as he did. It's like, oh, he's just, he's not that bad. And look, he's on this thing and he's talking on that thing and he's on. We're sharing this space with them. If people have to go to the place that says, like in their mission statement, we're totally good with neo-Nazis and liars, then people know that going on.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also just want to say, too, that another reason that Milo got really punctured was because of also just like that BuzzFeed report on Milo is, I mean, there was the comment that people dug up, the pedophilia thing, which I don't remember, but that was one. And to be honest with you, my read on that was that he was already on the way out anyways.
That was a Dean scream.
Yeah, they would have run interference for him, because that's exactly the type of comment that he would make and say like, ooh, I was just joking, get away with. So I don't know about that. But the BuzzFeed report that actually was like, all right, this isn't speculative. Like, this is the pipeline. This is the piece in Breitbart. This is how they would advise like actual active white nationalists. This is how it gets reframed and laundered for, that was devastating, because it shut down a whole spectrum of the conduit bullshit conversations from people like Dave Rubin, who'd be like, oh, just ideas. And then it was like, okay, this is the actual idea process. And that was, that was frankly just journalism and analysis. I think that really pinned them.
And it destroyed their entire sort of finely tuned dog whistle narrative.
Exactly.
That was so careful to not be racist and fascist and bigoted. But, you just scrape the surface a little bit and it just ripped the whole thing off. And it had, a total ripple effect, because now we can apply that rubric to other people. Look, his rhetoric is exactly the same things that Milo was saying. So obviously he's, that's what Sargon told shtick. He was recently, I heard him on a Kevin Logan podcast, and they ripped him apart, calling him names, tore his argument apart repeatedly, and were totally disrespectful to him.
Nice.
It was really fun.
Sounds like other people are following my lead into how to debate.
Well, sure. Well, but he came away from it like he took all the jabs, all the gender-specific name-calling at him and all this stuff, and came away like, I can take it because I'm in the marketplace of ideas. So it was like, it was fun to watch him just get ripped apart, but he just laughed it off.
Right.
And so that's, again, where that BuzzFeed article is so important, because he's not an honest actor. Sargon isn't debating issues. Give me a fucking break.
100%.
I'll use this issue to sell
100%.
this other lie.
And for what it's worth, and this is where it's the last thing I'll say, I think where there's value in defending like the actual liberal bougie values that anybody who I think is just even contextually honest, like if you're, in your early 30s in the United States of America, even in a radically changed political situation, you're going to want to preserve some of these things that we call bourgeois or whatever the hell. And frankly, I think for what it's worth, the Milo case is actually an example of the most potent thing that really destroyed him was aggressive, smart, First Amendment-enabled investigative journalism. And that's when he was totally destroyed. That was when the book company dropped his book, and now he's a joke. So great.
I don't know. I feel like these these liberal media platforms who still think that they can be neutral and provide an equal amount of time to these people, they need to wake up, because throughout history, we've seen fascists do not respect their liberal values, and they're going to use any platform they're given against them.
No doubt. Richard Spencer, we played a clip of him a year and a half ago. He said, we'll use it, and then when we get in power, we get rid of the First Amendment.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
He doesn't care about free speech.
Of course
and
not.
I realized...
I do.
Yeah. And I realized that most of these companies are more likely to break for the right than the left when push comes to shove. But they should be a little smarter than that about it, because the fascists are not on their side.
Okay, fam, we're back. So look, the one thing I really just wanted to say is, like, in a number of people have said this. In particular, Sacha Baron Cohen touched on this notion in a video he made for the ADL, for the Anti-Defamation League. And it's like, look, so we do live under capitalism. Right now, I don't want to get into what we would do if we broke all the platforms up and all this kind of stuff, or even a post-capitalist solution for how to monitor and hate speech and stuff like that in our social media spaces. I kind of want to address it based on where we're at and what we have right now. And I just think it would be very useful if a sort of small team from the Anti-Defamation League, in congruence with a small team from the Southern Poverty Law Center, were convened for the sole purpose of really fleshing out how do we address hate speech in online spaces, because these are the people who are experts on how hate speech is disseminated and how it's hidden and how it's manipulated to seem like other things and stuff. So they're more adept at spotting real hate speech as opposed to uncomfortable speech. And anyway, that's the basic sort of genesis of that idea. But I just don't think it should be just ADL or just Southern Poverty Law Center. I think it would be good if they kind of combine their efforts. And if anything, basically just outline a sort of a basic template for how to train people to spot this stuff, right? Because, there's a number of things that, that go up that are blatantly like trying to expose obvious racism and hate speech. And then it gets dinged for what it shows in the video, because the person and then you dispute it with the people at YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is. And they don't have the base knowledge and skills necessary to differentiate what is a sort of, defensive hate speech and an attempt to expose how nasty it is. But if you could have this group of people that are immersed in the activities and exposing the activities of far-right hate, bigots and this kind of stuff, and neo-Nazi groups and fascist groups, and they, like I said, could sort of outline a basic model of training for people that work for the various social media platforms, that they can then, when a video is disputed, they can go, oh, no, this is bullshit. This is obviously some fucking, dog whistle for racism. And I'm sorry, your pleas of fair use don't apply, because literally you're just trying to exploit the concept of fair use to covertly push pro-fascist and pro-bigoted talking points. So I am so in agreement with essentially everyone in the MR crew and myself at the time that we should not just be trusting like Zuckerberg or the CEOs of any of these social media platforms to make these determinations. And so that's another reason why I think ADL, SPLC, maybe I should state this and I didn't, they would be an outside entity, right? They're not hired by Facebook. And if anything, they would be, they would also have a team that would be monitoring the activities of social media and then communicating to Facebook, yo, this is what we're seeing going on. And not just Facebook, every social media platform. And so it would be like an expert citizens review board, right? Anyway, those are my thoughts and where we're at. I hope that this conversation does progress. And to anyone that's saying we shouldn't deplatform Nazis, fuck off. Fuck off. Just fuck off. You're pretending. You're a reformist douchebag. You're not out here like, you don't really give a shit about this issue. You just like having a fucking take on it that's edgy and shit. And fuck off. I don't have time for you. And none of our comrades should either. Anyway, there it is, fam. Like, before I get out, I just gotta say, man, deep, deep love and respect. And rest in power, Michael Brooks, man. I'm a little bit, I don't know what's the right word, but taken aback that I actually got to have that opportunity, fam. And to be able to share it with you too, just wow. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. I'm Reverend Aaron. This has been Punks for Progress, and them's my thoughts on free speech absolutism versus deplatforming. And my conclusion is, fuck every fucking fascist. Let's get them out our spaces. Cheers, fam.